Okay, sorry. Do you guys see it?
It's
Yeah.
not in presenting mode, Tony. Yeah. Okay. Guys, just so you know, Tony is my PhD student here in Brazil, and his thesis is about the AUBPT validation here uh, for Brazil. So this is the first paper from his thesis. It's about the cross-cultural adaptation, and in fact, he's presenting our process to back translation here to Brazil. Is the first phase of this big stud. Uh, this stud is we received 2 grants to develop this study here in Brazil, and one of them is grant right now. So Tony, take your time.
Okay, guys. Like Leo said, we did the translation and the cultural adaptation of the LBPT to Brazilian Portuguese. And this is the first paper. And we structured the paper in the methodology proposed by Deborah Beaton, which is the translation, back translation, as Leo said, and the final synthesis. We chose to do it so because of the normatives of the where we are going to present it. So they had some limitations, and we chose to structure the paper on the methodology process and not on the tasks of the LBPT, like the BART and the stop sign, which assess the behaviors. Okay, so we just to for us to know. Okay, so just to make a brief contest. Okay, another thing, people. My English is good. My grammar is better than my English. So I'm going to make a very technical presentation. So just to make sure I'm not going to forget any word or I'm not going to pass through things without saying it, I will read some parts, okay? I hope it's not that boring. I will try to make it not that boring. So just to make a contest, to present a brief contest, alcohol consumption, sorry, is a global public health problem which impacts like on collective health. Although are socially accepted and embedded in diverse cultural and recreational practices, alcohol is associated with like many diseases, mental disorders, accidents, and many forms of violence. Like especially in Brazilian context, alcohol consumption presents some particular characteristics, like it's present in our cultural daily celebrations. It's present in our cultural daily leisure time. So people drink to celebrate, people drink to rest, people drink to forget their problems. So somehow alcohol is inherited in Brazilian culture. And another aspect of the Brazilian scenario that concerns the social and territorial inequalities that passes through alcohol usage as well. Some socially vulnerable populations are often exposed to the negative consequences with the harmful consumption. So, particularly outside the major urban centers, there is restricted availability of continuous care services, which may hinder early interventions and adequate follow-up for more severe cases. It's okay, guys. Is it easy to understand? How does it sound? I'm not having any idea.
Yeah, you're
It's
doing
great,
great.
Tony. Doing great. Thanks.
Okay. So, given the health impacts of alcohol consumption, the development of this new strategy and instruments capable of improving its identification and assessment is like, I may say urgent here in Brazil. because traditional diagnostic methods are often based on retrospective self-reports, which may limit the early direction of behavioral risk patterns. Then behavioral assessment tools have been used to identify cognitive and decision-making mechanisms related to this alcohol consumption. So this expansion of these diagnostics tools, contributes to the development of these more precise strategies for prevention, monitoring, and intervention here. Okay, so let's go to the study design, which I said where we are structuring the paper. So this study was designed as a methodological study aimed at the cross-cultural adaptation of this instrument, the LBPT, of course. Methodological studies of this nature are primarily intended to ensure that instruments developed within a specific cultural context can be valid and reliable applied in different settings, culture and populations, like we're doing here, and it's proposed by Deborah Beaton. Our focus was the adaptation of the LBPT, originally developed in English, into the Brazilian Portuguese, and it involves more than a literal translation of LBPT's content. Literature demonstrates that linguistic, cultural, and contextual differences may alter the way participants interpret questions, instructions, or experimental tasks. So for this reason, the objective of this cross-cultural adaptation is to preserve the original meaning of the construct being measured while simultaneously ensuring its adequate comprehension within the new target population, okay? So then a structured process of translation and an equivalence assessment between the instrument versions was adopted. Follow the guidelines proposed by Deborah Beaton, of course. The guidelines establish systematic procedures designed to minimize translation biases and to ensure that the adapted version maintains conceptual and semantic equivalence with the original instrument. So the first stage of the process consisted, here you can understand better maybe, consisting of an independent translations of the original instruments into the Brazilian Portuguese. The use of the independent translation is recommended because it allows for the generation of alternative versions of the text. It's called alternative versions of the text, making it possible to identify difference in interpretation and distinct linguistic choices between them. So these multiple translation or both translations provide a more robust basis for constructing the preliminary version of the adapted instrument. Then, the synthesis stage of the translated version was conducted. During this phase, different versions were compared and consolidated into a single consensual version. This procedure involved a detailed analysis of each instrument item with the aim of selecting the clearest linguistic formulations and those most appropriate to the Brazilian cultural context. The synthesis process seeks to balance fidelity to the original content with the naturalness in the target language. And after that, the back translation procedure was conducted. In this process, the synthesized Portuguese version was translated back into English by two independent translators who had no prior contact with the original instrument. Back translation allows for the identification of possible distortions in the meaning of the introduced during the initial translation process. Is it clear, guys? So we translated back to English to make sure that it is the same as the original construct. So, following this stage, the instrument was submitted to evaluation by a committee of experts. This committee is generally composed of researchers, healthcare, and professionals. In our case, it is somebody who is translated instrument to her thesis, and post graduation students as well, and doctorate candidates as well in here of our programs. Sorry. This committee role is to critically examine each item of the adapted instrument, assessing its clarity, cultural relevance, and equivalence in relation to the original version. Throughout this adaptation, the adaptation process, we made sure to efforts were made sure to ensure efforts were made to ensure different types of equivalence between the instrument versions. This included linguistic equivalence related to the translation accuracy, semantic equivalence concerning to the meaning of the words and expressions, which we were going to show you on the results. Conceptual equivalence, ensuring that the psychological construct remained the same, and the cultural equivalence, which consider the suitability of the instrument for the target population's social-cultural context. Is it okay here, guys? Is it
Yes,
clear?
that's funny.
Is it
That's
clear?
okay.
Okay. So I will go to the next part, which is the results, okay? So here, this present part of the results obtained in the process, especially the items that require adjustments to ensure conceptual equivalence between the original English version and the Brazilian version. So in the psychometric instrument adaptation, conceptual equivalence refers to the preservation of the same theoretical meaning of an item after the translation, ensuring that the behavior or the psychological process being assessed remains unchanged in the new cultural settings. So aqui, como eu disse para vocês, ao invés da gente organizar o paper pelos behaviors assessment e psychological assessment, colocamos aqui we put it, on the table to organize it on the process. So the example presented refers to the item 1 in the task. In the original version of the instrument, the item presented as you earn money as you inflate the balloon. The instruction is part of the behavioral task in which participants receive progressive rewards as they continue inflating a virtual balloon, a model used in studies investigating risk-taking and reward sensitivity. So, during the process, the final Portuguese version was defined as: você recebe dinheiro à medida que enche o balão. This formulation was selected after discussion among the translators with the aim of preserving the experimental logic of the task while ensuring that the instruction would be clearly understood by Brazilian Portuguese participants. So the primary justification for this adaptation was related to the need to make explicit the progressive nature of the reward associated with the act of inflating the balloon. The expression, à medida que, reinforces the idea that the reward occurs gradually as the participant continues performing the task. This aspect is central to the functioning of the experimental model, since the task especially depends on the relationship between increasing risk and accumulated reward. Another point considering during the translation was the need to avoid possible misunderstanding regarding the type of the reward offered in the task. In some cultural contexts, the expression earning money may be interpreted as real monetary compensation. So for this reason, the adaptation sought to implicitly convey that the reward was hypothetical and embedded within an experimental scenario rather than representing direct payment to the participant. These decisions were made with the objective of preserving the methodological logic of the task without altering the construct assessed by the instrument. It's important. In behavioral tasks used in research on alcohol consumption and decision-making, even minor linguistic modifications may influence how participants interpret the instructions, which could ultimately affect the validity of the obtained results if it would change the way it could interpret the task orientation. Sorry. Therefore, this example is illustration how the process of adaptations involves not only the literal translation of the instrument items, but also a careful analysis of their conceptual meaning and interpretation within the new cultural context. This procedure is to ensure that the adapted version of the instrument maintains methodological equivalence and scientific comparability with the original version. Okay? So, just to finish this table, item 2 presented on this slide refers the original instruction. Larger balloons may result in an hypothetical monetary gain. Em Portuguese version, the item was adapted to grandes balões podem resultar em ganho hipotético de dinheiro. This adaptation aimed to make the relations between the progressive increase of the balloon size and the potential financial gain within the experimental logic of the task clearly to the participants. So the reformulation also sought to preserve the central idea of the risk inherent in the task dynamics. In behavioral paradigm employed, participants may continue inflating the balloon in order to increase potential gains, but they simultaneously face the risk that the balloon may explode and the accumulated value may be lost. The clarity of the instruction is important to ensure that the participants adequately understand the relationship between risk and reward, which constitute the central construct of the assessed task. Sorry. In addition to the conceptual adaptations, this slide presents two examples of adjustments related to the experimental equivalence, especially in items 3 and 4. These adjustments concerns the translation of operational terms used with the interface of the experimental task, which must directly correspond to the actions performed by participants during the experiment. The item 3, the original term pump, was translated as bombear. The choice adopted to maintain direct correspondence with the action requested from the participants within the context of the text. The term accurately describes the act of inflating the balloon, preserving the operational logic of experimental interface and allowing participants to clearly understand the action they are expected to perform. So in the fourth item, the term cash out was translated as sacar. The selection of this expression sought to employ a more natural and functional term in Brazilian Portuguese that indicated the decision to stop the task and secure the amount accumulated up at that point. Within the context of the experimental dynamics, this decision represents a critical aspect of the participant behavior, as it involves evaluating the risk of continuing to inflate the balloon versus choosing to preserve the reward already obtained. So this illustrates the importance of aligning the terminology used in the instrument with the participants' concrete experience during the task. Minor linguistic differences may alter the interpretation of instructions or elements of the experimental interface, which could interfere in the observed behavioral patterns and, consequently, compromise the validity of the collected data. These examples the example presented on this slide demonstrates how cross-cultural adaptations involves a careful analysis not only of the conceptual meaning of the items, but also of the way participants interact with the experimental task, maintaining these different forms of equivalence to ensure that the adapted version of the instrument assesses the same cognitive and behavioral process investigated in the original version. Okay, guys. Do you have any questions, or do we do it after?
You can move
I
on
can do
to
it
that's
after.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So this example presents this, like, taken together, these examples demonstrate The cross-cultural adaptation process involved not only the literal translation, but also linguistic and the conceptual decisions that could ensure the proper understanding of the participant. Okay? So in here, we have sorry, this is okay, we have the back translation process. I'm sorry, guys. This slide presents examples of the items analyzed during the back translation stage, which was used to verify semantic equivalence between the original version of the instrument and the translated version. This procedure is widely recommended in the process of cultural adaptation of instruments because it allows research to identify possible changes in meaning introduced during the translation. By comparing the original test with the back-translated version, it becomes possible finally to evaluate where the conceptual content has been preserved or whether modifications occur that could compromise the interpretation of the item. In this example, the original instruction, please press the next button if you are a new user, was back translated as press next button if you are a new user. It can be observed that the only difference between lies in the sentence structure, especially in the removal of the term please. This alteration does not modify the meaning of the instruction or its operational function within the instrument, indicating the semantic content was somehow preserved. In second example, the original sentence, please enter your ID below, was back translated as enter your ID below. Once again, the identified difference is related only to the level of formality of the expression. The removal of the politeness marker does not alter the instruction conveyed to the correspondent, maintaining the same semantic content and the same purpose within the questionnaire. Overall, the analysis of these items indicates that the variations identified during the back translations process were limited to the superficial linguistic aspects, such as syntactic structure or degree of formality. These differences do not compromise the meaning of the items or their function within the instrument, allowing the conclusion that adequate semantic equivalence was achieved between the analyzed versions. Somehow looks like we are not so polite, right? We took please in front of the items, and I don't know why. So, just to keep with the results, the example presented in here refers to the original item containing the expression two hypothetical cash rewards. After the back translation process, same item appeared as two hypothetical monetary rewards. Although there is a lexical variation between the terms cash and monetary, the analysis indicated that both expressions refer to the same underlying concept, the hypothetical financial rewards using within the context of the experimental task. So this type of variation in wording is relatively common in linguistic adaptation process, since different terms may be employed to express of the same economical or behavioral concept. In the present case, the modification does not alter the logic of the task, nor the change the type or the incentive described to the participants. In both versions, the item continues to communicate the idea of an hypothetical financial reward that are part of the instrumental experimental dynamics. This interpretation presented on the slide highlights precisely this point. Despite the variation in lexical choice, the central concept remains preserved. This indicates that the translation maintained the conceptual structure of the original item and did not introduce distortions into the meaning into the meaning intended by the instrument. So I chose a different word, but it kept the same idea. Oh, sorry, okay. Here, this example presented corresponds to the original sentence. You earn money by simply pumping a balloon, which was back translated as you earn money by inflating a balloon. At first glance, a lexical change can be observed between pumping and inflating. However, the analysis conducted by the team demonstrated that this modification did not compromise the functional meaning of the activity described in the instrument. From a methodological perspective, the purpose of back translation is precisely to identify potential semantic losses or distortions throughout the translation process. In this case, despite the vocabulary substitution, both expressions refers to the same practical action related to inflating the balloon during the experimental task. Therefore, the behavior expected from participants remained equivalent to that proposed in the original version. This result reinforces the importance of not restricting the analysis only to the literal translation of words. In cross-cultural adaptations, minor linguistic modifications are often necessary to make the content more natural, comprehensible, and culturally appropriate to the target language, without altering the constructed assets by the instrument, which is maybe the more important. Okay, so in here we have this final table. While the previous slide discussed the preservation of the practical experience associated with the task, the focus here is on maintaining the meaning of the instructions throughout the translation and back translation stages. This first example refers to the instruction. Sorry, please press the next button if you are new user, which was back translate. I talked about this once already, right? Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I just showed this, right? So, okay, so it can be observed that involved, however, okay, I talked about the police. So, I'm sorry, here it is. From the semantic perspective, this modification did not compromise the central meaning of this instruction. I already talked about it, right?
Yeah.
Good. I will come here to this parts of the results then. So in the examples presented in the final synthesis version, retain the most and operational wording from the initial translation, prioritize the formulations that facilitates the user comprehension of the instruction. So like I repeatedly said during the results, we did not just make the translation and literally of the words. We tried to make it more comprehensible and more natural to the Brazilian context. And that are such minor wording like the cash out word, which was the one we discussed, because we could use like the word print or the word withdrawn, and we chose it to the sacar, which maybe it's closer to withdrawn. So we compare somehow these possibilities and try to make it sound more natural to the experimental task and to the ambientation of the task. So the final versions of the task were determined by this committee, and this committee compared the initial translation with the summarized version, and took the grammatical error, eliminating redundancies, and selecting the clearest part of the Brazilian Portuguese. And I take it. The translation and cross-cultural adaptation of this research instruments, such as the LBPT, is a process demanding not only linguistic transportation, but also cultural adaptation to ensure validity and especially reliability comparable to the original instruments. Our study achieved the objective of translating and culturally adapting the LBPT for Brazilian Portuguese, developing a procedure that accurately reflects to the Brazilian reality. So in here we have what we discussed in the beginning, like the development and application of the adapted LBPT mark and advancement in promoting personalized care for Brazilian population, maybe improving care quality in service like CAPS-AD and other mental institutions, and maybe the possibility of producing policies as well. The work underscored the importance of a well-structured adaptation process that expands beyond mere translation, embracing cultural complexity to foster progress in both clinical practice and scientific research in Brazil. And in here, the references used. Guys, thanks for your patience. I hope it was not so boring because I saw it took like half an hour. And that's it. If it was not read, if I could not read, I was not going to make it because of my English, okay? So I think I can answer some questions or talk
Thank you,
about
Tony.
if